In this video, we're going to be discussing Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Horodoker or Vitebsk, depending on the context. He was born in the year 1730, and he passed away in the year 1788. It seems like he was born in Vitebsk. That's how he got his name, Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk. Later in life, he moved to a suburb of Vitebsk called Horodoker, where he got his name, Rabbi Mendel Horodoker. His father used to travel to the Baal Shem Tov as a Chassid, and as a young boy, he brought the Baal Shem Tov, his son, apparently around the age of 9. Later, as a young man, he met with the Baal Shem Tov, and he came one Erev Shabbos, one Friday afternoon, and he was preparing for Shabbos, and he showed up to synagogue about an hour after the Baal Shem Tov had already arrived, and the Baal Shem Tov was waiting for him. The Baal Shem Tov did not show him apparently any outward, show him any special privileges or anything of the like outwardly. However, after the Shabbos, or after the visit was concluding, he called his student Rabbi Dovber, later known as the Maggid of Mezrich, and he called in one of his most famous students, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Polino, and also Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Horodoker. And he told them a story, a very interesting story. And after this encounter, the Maggid of Mezrich, later the Baal Shem Tov's successor, says, I understood the whole story. Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Polonoi says, I understood half the story, and Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Vitebsk said, I understood none of the story. And really, later on, they realized that this was actually a parable for the rest of their lives, specifically the life of Rabbi Menachem Mendel. And later, we'll talk about the rest of that story. He later became a student of the Maggid of Mezrich, and he continued. And after the Maggid's passing, it seems that, and after the passing later of his son, shortly thereafter, Rabbi Avram HaMalach, it seems that he became kind of the leader of the group. Whenever the Maggid's students would sign a document, he was always the first signator, and the first signature, or the first signatory, however you say it. And even Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, later known as the Maggid of Liazna, the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, he also considered him for that time period his Rebbe. So the Maggid passed away in 1772 or 3, and the Alter Rebbe, the Rabbi Menachem Mendel Horodoker in 1777 decides he's going to move to Israel, and he becomes this becomes the one of the most famous pilgrimages to Israel of that time. Again, at that time, Israel was under the occupation of the Turkish government, and it was not easy living there. They talk about pioneers. These people also were rabbis. They were scholars. They didn't have any way of making a living, so they really were taking a big risk to move to Israel. And later, their families came, which ends up being a tremendous burden as financially on them, which we'll see in a second. On his way to Israel, he stops and visits Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Polino, also known as the Toldos, after his book called the Toldos Yaakov Yosef. And he visits him and he asks him, where are you holding in the story? Meaning the story that the Baal Shem Tov had told them as when they were young men. And he says, I'm halfway through the story. And he says, and do you remember the part of the story where you're going to move to Israel? Yes. And you're going to visit me on the way to Israel? Yes, I remember. That's why I'm here. And he said, and where is the great light that is going to light up the world? And he points to Rabbi Shneur Zalman, later the founder of Chabad, the Alter Rebbe. Just as to take a step back, previously, when he at some point he became extremely ill, he said he realized at some point that he said, I'm not going to pass away. I know that I have not finished my story yet. At any rate, so he said at that time he understood the entire story, and he moved to Israel. And however, coming with him was the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman, as we mentioned, and he implored on him that he should stay. They actually stopped their travels, and he implored on him that he should stay in Russia and lead the Hasidic movement in Russia. And he actually appointed two others as well. Later, one of them passed away. The other one actually became a Chassid of the Alter Rebbe, of Rabbi Shneur Zalman. So Rabbi Shneur Zalman became the prominent um, uh, Chasidic master in Russia, really the only one for a nice period of time, maybe 10 years, even more, maybe even 20 years. He was really the Chasidic Rebbe of Russia. Now, Russia specifically had that part of White Russia, where the Pale of Settlement, where the Jews were allowed to live in Russia, was actually a very tough time being a Hasidic master, because that's where the Misnagdim, that's where the opponents of Hasidim were. And therefore, it wasn't, they were not, Rabbi Menachem Mendel was not agreeing to allow anyone else to be a Chasidic master in that part of Russia. He said only Rabbi Shneur Zalman could do that. And later, actually some Hasidim, they did appeal to Rabbi Menachem Mendel and asked him please to agree that they should be able to put a Polish type Hasidic Rebbe into Russia, and he did not allow under any circumstances. A Polish Hasidic Rebbe means the Chabad style, which the Alter Rebbe developed, versus the Polish style. The Chabad style was that you have to study Hasidus, you have to study the works of Hasidism, you have to understand it, and then you apply it. Apply it in prayer, apply it in Torah study, apply it in your service of God. Versus the Polish style was you just connect to your Hasidic Rebbe and he will lift you up. And that was not the style of Russia. And the Alter Rebbe, however, still had a great amount of respect for Rabbi Menachem and the Horodoker, and he actually, in all his letters, he'll say, Rabbi Seinu Be'eretz HaKodesh, our rabbis in Israel. He was referring to chiefly Rabbi Menachem Mendel. Now, Rabbi Menachem Mendel continued to lead the Hasidim. However, he told, even in Russia, he told them, no, you have to go to Rabbi Shneur Zalman. He is the leader. He also was extremely humble. There's a story that he used to dress in a very respectable way, in a very fancy way, and people were saying, how could a Hasidic master dress in such a fancy way? And Rabbi Yaakov Yosef Palanoy said that actually this was his way of fighting the evil inclination. That where do you find like the most precious jewel? If you want to hide it, you hide it in the garbage. No one will think to look there. So the idea was that if he were to dress fancy, he could kind of hide his true self. And really, actually, humility was one of his most important traits that he really worked on. He used to sign letters, Hashafal B'emes, the true lowly person. That was the way he would sign his letters. Many of his letters have been printed to the Hasidim in Israel, to the Hasidim in Russia. So a lot of his correspondence has been printed. So you could see these ideas. Now, one of the things that happens is that when he's in Israel, they moved to the city of Tzfas, and as we mentioned, many of their families came, and it became tremendously financially very difficult to support them. And what he did was, they appealed to the other, few Jews who were living in Israel at the time. He appealed to the Sephardic community. The Sephardic community welcomed them with open arms and had no problem. However, the Ashkenazi community was being influenced by the other Ashkenazim of Europe, specifically the Misnagdim, the antagonists of Hasidus and the Hasidic movement, and they were being influenced by them, and therefore they would not donate to their cause, and therefore they had to actually go and raise money back in Russia. And that is how Kollel, it first started off as called Kollel Hasidim, and later became known as Kollel Chabad, a charity that exists till this day. Today, I believe they have a budget of over $100 million where they distribute alms to the needy in Israel. And that was established in the 1780s. However, now that they're in Israel, like we said, they had to raise money all the way from Russia. They couldn't even rely on the Ashkenazim in Israel or other Ashkenazi charities, and therefore it seems that they actually suffered a lot from the Ashkenazi community in Israel, and he actually wrote in one of his letters that he's suffering more in Israel than he did in Russia, even though one of the reasons he had left Russia, seemingly, was because of the abuse he was getting from the Misnagdim. Now, earlier, when he was a young man, together with Rabbi Shneur Zalman, and during the lifetime of the Maggid of Mizrich, him and Rabbi Shneur Zalman together went to Vilna, the chief this city of opponents of the Hasidic movement. And specifically, the person who everybody said that they were holding on to was that the Vilna Gaon, Rabbi Eliyahu Kramer, I believe his last name was, of Vilna, and he was the chief Hasidic antagonizer. And he never endorsed physical abuse, even though that later did happen after his lifetime, after he passed away. But he did endorse, saying that the Hasidic movement was heresy, and they said that we have to go meet him and talk to him. And according to Jewish law, you're not allowed to really say something about somebody unless you've heard both sides of the story. And he did not hear their sides. That they thought that perhaps he would meet with them, they would be able to convince them that they were, yes, they were teaching Chassidus and Kabbalistic ideas, but this was, God forbid to say, this was heresy or outside of Judaism. And they actually, the Vilna Gaon himself studied a lot of Kabbalah, was an expert in Kabbalah. However, he had some very different ideas in Kabbalah. Maybe we'll discuss it in another time. And he refused to meet with them. The story goes that he jumped out a window. Whether that is true or not, we'll leave for the historians to figure out. But he definitely left the city. That is documented. Even the Misnagdim, the people against the Chasidic movement, they recorded the story as well. In fact, some of the Misnagdim say that at that time that the Vilna Gaon looked through the people and he saw Rabbi Shneur Zalman, he saw Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Horodoker, and he said, if I let them in, I'm going to walk out teaching Chassidus as well. So he felt that he was very sure about his ideas, and therefore he left town until they left. Now, Rabbi Menachem Mendel, as we said, he was originally from Vitebsk and Horodoker, a suburb of Vitebsk, a big city in Russia. One of the residents of Vitebsk early in his youth was Rabbi Shneur Zalman. And in fact, apparently he had some influence on Rabbi Shneur Zalman to make his decision to go visit the Maggid of Mezrich, later his master, and therefore becoming a Chassid and later continuing the Hasidic movement. And in the year as we said previously, 1788, he passes away on Rosh Chodesh Iyar. Rabbi Shneur Zalman actually wrote a letter of comfort to the family and to all the Hasidim in Israel on the loss of their leader. That letter is printed as epistle 28 in the Tanya, in the section called Igeres HaKodesh, the Holy Letters, and in that letter he describes the importance of what does it mean? What is a tzaddik after his passing? His passing was not known in Russia until about a year later. It seems that there was there was some issues with the border at that time. Again, Russia and Turkey were always fighting. So I don't think it was related to that specifically. It could be another conflict that prevented some border crossings, and therefore the people who were come to raise money were not able to go back and forth. So in that time, there was not really news about coming from Israel, and therefore they didn't know about Rabbi Menachem Mendel's passing until later. He did not want his son, Rabbi Moshe, who was named after his father, Rabbi Moshe, he didn't want his son to take over the Hasidic movement in Israel. And however, Rabbi Avram of Kalisker, as he was known, he became, and he had again immigrated together with Rabbi Menachem Mendel, and he took over the leadership of the Hasidic movement in Israel. And Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Horodoker is buried in Tiberia. His writings include the books Pri Haaretz, Pri Ha'etz, and Likutei Amarim, and they are studied till this day, including having influenced some of the teachings of Rabbi Menachem Mendel, influenced Rabbi Shneur Zalman as well. And some of his ideas are mentioned in the Tanya, the magnum opus of Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the Bible of Hasidic study. So Rabbi Menachem Mendel's influence is felt to this day. In addition, his name, Menachem Mendel, ends up coming into the Lubavitch and Chabad dynasty. The Rabbi Shneur Zalman named his grandson Menachem Mendel after his teacher, Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Horodoker, and he became the third Chabad Rebbe. His great grandson became the The Lubavitcher Rebbe was named after him. Menachem Mendel after the third Chabad Rebbe, who was named after Menachem Mendel Horodoker. I am also carrying the name Menachem Mendel after the Tzemach Tzedek, after the third Chabad Rebbe. So I also have, I guess, a connection to Rabbi Menachem Mendel Horodoker in that way. So there we have it. This very important Chasidic master. If you have any questions, comments, if there's a mistake they made, something I should have said, something I could have said. Oh, one more story before I forget. Very important story. You can't go anything about Rabbi Menachem Mendel Horodoker without telling the story. And when he lived in Israel, a person lost his mind and he started blowing a shofar on Har HaZeisim, and he said Mashiach came. A whole story. And people came to Rabbi Menachem Mendel Horodoker and they said, "No, Mashiach is here. And it seems that Mashiach has come." And the story goes that he went to the window and he opened the window and he smelled the air and he said, "Mashiach has not come yet." And he sat back down and continued his day. And the explanation is that when Mashiach comes, the world is different. But the question is, if the world is different when Mashiach comes and sensitive tzaddikim, sensitive holy people could sense it, how come he had to go to the window? And the answer is because Rabbi Menachem Mendel Horodoker was a tzaddik who lived with Mashiach every moment. In his room, in his atmosphere, in his realm, Mashiach was already there. And his job as teaching Chassidus was to bring that idea to everybody else and to make the world ready for Mashiach. And it's a tremendous lesson for us how we can prepare ourselves for Mashiach and make ourselves ready for Mashiach, and that's how we influence the world. And we see that was achieved by Rabbi Menachem Mendel Horodoker, and hopefully with Hashem's help, we will see Mashiach very soon. Again, if you have any questions, comments, anything I could have said, should have said, please put it in the comments. We love to get feedback. Thank you very much for joining. We'll see you in the next video.